Hey everyone, welcome to the Canine Culture Podcast, where we talk about everything dog. Q&As with veterinarian professionals, rescue operators, everyday topics. We cover everything dog on this podcast. So make sure you subscribe to the Canine Culture Podcast on your favorite podcast platform, and make sure you're following us on social media on both Instagram and Facebook. Thanks again for listening. Now here's that next episode. Hey everyone, welcome to the Canine Culture Podcast. This is your host, Brittany, and today we are joined by Dan. He is the owner of Coastal Canine here in Jacksonville, Florida. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
So we're going to talk about effective dog training and training the human, which a lot of people don't think about. And before we kind of get into it, tell us a little bit about Coastal Canine and about yourself.
Yeah, so I have been running Coastal Canine now for 8 years, almost 9 years in Jacksonville Beach. I run exclusively through private lessons. When I first started out, I did some of the board and train, but as we'll probably talk more about later, I saw that the most effectiveness came when owners got to be a part of the process and got to learn throughout, and I could dedicate my time to teaching them. Mm-hmm. So totally do private lessons, no board and trains. And it's for pet dogs. I do a lot of work with shelter dogs as well. But anything from just your puppy pet foundations all the way through rehabilitation. And it's been, there's no shortage of dogs in Jacksonville. So it's been
Yeah, that's awesome. So let's start kind of with understanding dog behavior. And so what are some key behavioral traits of dogs that dog owners need to understand or should understand?
Well, I think starting off, you don't want to put too much stock in it, but I look at, first of all, just breed characteristics. What is the dog in front of you? What type of dog it is? Mm-hmm. More important than that, really, because even dogs within the same litters, you can see some different temperaments, but what are, again, the breed characteristics that tend to overlay whatever it is with the dog? I look at motivation level. Mm-hmm. What are the things that make the dogs tick? Is it toy drive? Is it food drive? Are they simply motivated by affection? Are we able to build that motivation? Some of them, if you start early enough with a young dog, you can really bring that out. Some of them, you need to cap it backwards a bit. Then I look at confidence level as well, because dealing with such a mixture of dogs, whether it's, usually just the shelter dogs, the rescue dogs, they're not confident. That doesn't necessarily mean they've been abused, but they've almost all had a complete lack of structure. They don't know how to navigate the world. So you have to work on the confidence piece, whereas puppies, it's like clay. You can just mold it and take it as we go. So I would say those are the three big things that I look at when I first see a dog are, what are the breed characteristics that stand out with this individual pup? What are its motivators? And then what is the dog's confidence level? And from that, we can really base like, okay, here's how we need to tackle this dog.
Mm-hmm. I think it's interesting you talk about the motivators. A lot of people assume all dogs like toys, all dogs like treats. And this might even have been an assumption that I had before I started rescuing and working at the shelter. But you quickly realize, there are a lot of dogs, they don't care about toys. They might not care about treats. And so I think that poses a little bit of a challenge for people who get a dog and they're like, well, I'm just going to teach them sit with a treat. And they don't understand it's so much more multifaceted than that.
Yeah. And again, that takes us back to some of the breed characteristics. Like you think about a dog like a German Shepherd. Traditionally, they've been used for police type work, military work, and they are very accustomed to pressure-based training. That's what the breed has lived with. So where they might say, okay, I don't really care about the toy, I don't care about the tug today, but I'm going to respect and train quickly with some sort of leash pressure or something like that. That's just what they're comfortable learning with. Mm-hmm. Whereas you take a little lab or something, it's typically all about food motivation.
Right.
Depends on the dog. But again, some of those breed characteristics just depends on like what the history of that breed is.
Mm-hmm. And I think you might agree with this. Understanding how dogs communicate with humans or how they communicate with other dogs is also important. It's an important component of training, setting expectations. So can you speak to how dogs kind of communicate or some of their signals that they're trying to give us when they're communicating?
Yeah. It's funny. Thinking about that too, I think people almost put too much stock into trying to figure out what the dog is thinking in certain moments. But I always start with the idea that dogs have to be friendly with other dogs, and in order to be socialized, they have to be able to go and play in group settings, and that's not really what a dog needs. They need fulfillment mentally, they need fulfillment physically, and as owners, we can provide that to them. They don't necessarily need that social interaction. That said, we also want to put ourselves in a position of leadership, and I think that's a good way to say this. Especially with the rescue dogs, the not confident dogs, the ones who we see the most reactivity out of, their owners also aren't confident. So they're not the ones stepping in to make sure that they can handle the situation. The dogs see that, they notice it, and they don't trust that the owner is going to have their back. What does that lead to? That leads to defensive aggression. It leads to reactivity. It leads to flight. And when you're watching a lot of these videos that you see online of, okay, like, let's see what the dog's doing here. Do you see the moment the dog snaps? What's missing almost 100% of the time is an owner who's there to be the advocate for the dog. So yes, there are things we can look for in the dog's behavior, posture. Are they showing domination? Are they showing play stance? But overall, I think we as a dog owning community need to take some more ownership on the human end of that and say, I'm going to show the dog what's acceptable and what's not, but at the same time, I'm going to make sure that they understand that I have their best interest in mind, no matter what the situation is. And if it's a little long-winded, I'm sorry, but
no, that makes sense. Yeah. No, I've seen that play out for myself. I have a dog that was once reactive. I don't know if he loses the label. He's been demoted, so that's for the better. But because of his reactivity, I was always on guard and anxious, and I knew that he knew. And so that definitely played out when we were in public, when we would pass other dogs, when we would pass kids, bicycles. And so part of him learning and becoming less reactive and understanding what he needed to do, I had to understand how to kind of interact with him and to be more confident on his behalf, you know?
Correct.
So, yeah.
And that's why I focus so much in lessons on teaching the owners as opposed to just focusing on the dog. Again, you know, you look online and everybody loves seeing the flashy Instagram videos of the dogs doing these crazy things. And everybody says, oh, I want that dog. Well, they don't know the hours that these trainers had put in and how many bad takes there were before they got that flashy footage.
Yeah.
Like, I need to show when I go into a lesson that I'm going to be making sure the owner knows what to do when I'm not there.
Right.
And I would say probably 75% of the time in a lesson, I'm focusing on the mechanics and the skill level of the owner. The dog is usually the easy part.
What would you say are the most common behavioral issues you see from dogs? And they could be just generally what you see most often, or maybe caused by their owner or caused by humans in general.
Yeah, I think just in terms of the dog itself, it's usually just impulsive behavior. I mean, dogs are opportunists. If they think that they can do something and they think it's going to be satisfying, they're going to do it.
Right.
That comes back to the structure piece with owners in the household, making sure that you are, as an owner, are comfortable doing what needs to be done, setting boundaries, but also being very, very consistent. Because, I mean, at its core, that's how dogs navigate life. Is they see patterns, they say, this is what I can do, this is what I can't do, this is what I like, this is what I don't like, here's how I'm going to go about it. So, and then along with impulsive behavior, unfortunately, I would say the other thing that I see the most common is just fearful. I don't even know if fearful is the right word, but just a lack of confidence in general with the dogs. it seems a little counterintuitive, but a lot of people, when they have dogs that aren't confident, they want to just give them freedom and say, okay, here, just I want to love on you and let you do what you want to do because I want to make you happy.
That was me.
Well, yeah. So what we've learned is dogs that aren't confident don't like making decisions because they're always nervous if they're going to do the wrong thing.
Right.
So they see decision making as more of a burden. And again, going back to structure, I feel like you can't say that enough. Like the structure and the leadership provided brings clarity to the dog. And then they can say, okay, I know what to expect. Life is easier. Their confidence builds. So the freedom that people give out of love, it feels good for the human, but it's usually not what the dog needs.
Yeah. So if you are working with your first trainer, someone hires you, whether they've had dogs in the past, whether, it's a new rescue, a new shelter dog, what are some pieces of advice that you would have for them, or what's kind of the framework or the groundwork that you would lay for someone that wanted to put their dog into training? That way you would set them up for success. Like, what do you need the owner to understand and to do?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing, and we can dive a little bit deeper into it, is having realistic expectations of what they are capable of, not just physically, okay, what's my dog capable of, but for the owner, what does your schedule look like? How much time are you really devoted to being able to train? And when I say train, I'm talking about doing actual drills.
Right.
The overall structure of how you live with your dog is probably more important than just the commands you're giving. But it's very easy to say, ooh, I want my dog to do this and this and this. And you might practice it for a couple weeks and then life happens and all of a sudden you stop and your dog is left a little bit clueless. So I like to be very clear with my clients up front on, or I like them to be very clear with me on what their expectations are, how much time they're going to be able to devote to it. And we'll talk through it too. Like when we're scheduling lessons, tell me what your week looks like for work. Here's how I would split up training sessions with the dog. I want to make sure that I'm their partner in it. They have access to me between lessons too. I always tell people, like, don't wait until your next lesson to ask questions. If you're struggling with something, call me, text me, because you don't want to just be furthering something incorrect that you're doing. But yeah, going back to the initial question, I think just upfront, being able to talk through it with them of what are their goals, are they realistic goals, and then what does the daily structure need to look like to make that happen.
And do you think there's a general or a common, and this one's tricky because it's different for everyone, once you start working on a particular command or a behavior, is there a certain amount of time per day, per week that you normally suggest people, reinforce that or do drills with that particular task?
If it's an obedience command, I mean, if you do it once a day, that's fine. Just overall, when we're starting out with the dog and we're teaching new behaviors, like if you're just talking about doing place or stay, sit down, the actual kind of commands, I tell people more frequent, shorter sessions are the way to go, as opposed to just one long session in the day. That way, well, a couple things happen. One, your dog gets used to knowing that they can be called into action at any time. It holds you as an owner accountable to getting your repetitions in during the day if you know you have to do it more frequently. And mentally for the dog, if they're getting a little bit of mental work throughout the day and physical work, they don't get to that point where they're pent up and at the end of the day they got those crazy zoomies and everything because they haven't done anything, or they're frustrated and they start chewing things. If you can give them some sort of mental and physical release in little bits throughout the day, you tend to have a better behaved dog. And then outside of the obedience commands, just how you live with your dog, the structure, the management that's involved, that's something that's just an ongoing process. It's not like, okay, I only want you to do this once a day. It's like, these are the things that you're going to implement to make the dog's life manageable and your life manageable in between training sessions.
Right. what kind of issues do you normally see with the owners? Whether it be not doing their homework, whether it be them getting too lax too quickly, like what do you see as a common fail point?
Well, thankfully, not doing their homework is not an issue because I am very clear with clients before they sign up. In fact, if you fill out a form on my website, there's a box you have to check that says, hey, I understand that my participation is needed ongoing throughout this process. But you also find the people that want to do private lessons, they're excited about being part of the process. They're not the people who are saying, I'm just going to send my dog off and hopefully it's trained when it comes back.
Right.
Trying to think if there are really any struggles to it. I think with people that if anything, it's almost the opposite. They come to me and say, I just want my dog to be well behaved. I want him to walk nicely on leash. And then we get to lesson 3 and they see what their dog is capable of. And they say, woo, well, can we try this?
Yeah.
Can we try this? And what are the next steps after we finish this program? Can we do more advanced things? I think it's more the opposite. I think that people start to raise their own expectations once they see what they're capable of and when they see what their dog is capable of.
And you mentioned just now people who just send their dog away and they expect them to come back trained. So we did a board and train, but it was very clear to us when your dog comes home, you have activities, you have drills morning and evening.
Yes.
And the trainer would come in once a week and kind of reinforce everything that was learned. And we would do it in stages and progressions. So I've had friends that are like, oh, you did a board and train. I bet your dog's just perfect. You didn't have to do anything. And it's like, that's not it at all.
Yeah.
So
you need to know what's going on too. And
right.
Again, I'm not slamming board and trains.
Right.
Across that way because I don't know any trainer who does a board and train that doesn't require follow-up lessons.
Yeah.
But you're not getting to go, as an owner, you're not getting to be the one who's actually learning and training and building the dog. So yes, your dog might come back in a much better state. However, you still have to show your dog that all those things that they learned, all those rules, it all applies back here. And unless you are consistent and are confident in taking that next step with the dog, he's going to regress quickly because he doesn't trust you yet or doesn't see you as the same level of authority, whatever you want to call it. Whereas with private lessons, you're building that relationship from lesson 1 and you get to the end of it and the dog says like, okay, this is a much more livable situation. I trust you. I want you to be my advocate and life is easy peasy.
Right. Whenever you do private lessons, do you typically involve the entire family or everyone in the household?
Ideally, obviously there are lots of families with young kids. Usually the 5 or 6 year olds, they'll be playing in the background. But once you get to the 8 or 9 year olds, they'll usually want to get some repetitions in with training. But at least, if it's a couple, I want them both there. I like to have, if they have a regular dog walker that they use or a pet sitter, I invite them in for lessons because that's also a big question that people ask is, hey, I'm going on vacation. Is my dog going to lose all the stuff we're working on? It's like, well, he might regress a little bit, but it's like riding a bike. However, if we can get your dog walker to come do a lesson, we can show them what we're doing. And I also encourage people to film every lesson. But, think of it like game film in football or something. It's just, you're always going to have it to refer back to.
Right.
And it also saves me as a business owner. It saves me a lot of time answering questions because instead of just firing away text messages to me or calls, people can just go back to the footage and say, oh, that's what Dan said. That's how I do it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And any kind of like final advice for someone who's looking for a trainer, someone who wants their dog trained, and any advice or how should I put it? Any way to level set those expectations?
I think that, whether you want to, I don't want to make this sound like a sales pitch, but you want somebody, and taking this step back, before I was in dog training, I worked in banking worked in sales, financial advising, and then in bank management. And those skills, especially the people management skills, I think are almost more valuable than just the mechanical skills of training a dog, because understanding how to coach and bring out the best in different personality types. It's really easy for people to feel nervous in the first couple of lessons, like I don't want to make a mistake. So you got to be supportive, but you also sometimes need to have hard conversations with clients. So finding a trainer who is really as good with people as they are with dogs is so important. There are so many really, really good dog trainers out there that just don't enjoy dealing with people. And at its core, dog training is a people business.
I've seen that. I've seen so many trainers, and they've said, I hate working with humans. I only work with the dogs. And
yeah,
it's even off-putting for me. It's like, well, I'm here, like, do you just want me to fall back into the background? So
it might sound cheesy, but like so many of my clients, they're genuinely my friends now. Like, you can't say that about your electrician, about your plumber.
Right.
And people will often look at dog trading like it's just some sort of a trade job. Like, it's like, no, like we kind of become part of the family.
Yeah. I think that's all kind of good, especially if someone's looking for a trainer. Let's say they're not in Jacksonville and they're shopping for a trainer. Just having a conversation with the trainer before you hire them and understanding what modalities they use, seeing how your conversation goes with them, kind of understanding their experience. I think that's all really helpful.
Yeah.
So where can people find you? Your website, social media, all of that?
Yep. Website is www.coastalcanine, letter K, number 9, fl.com. Instagram, Facebook, Coastal Canine FL is the handle. I probably should be better at posting more frequently on social media, but I'm on there. I mean, I do post a lot of tips. You'll get probably a good idea of what I'm like in lessons, who I am as a trainer by watching some of those videos. So even though I'm not by any means a professional at social media, I think it gives a pretty good glimpse as to how I do things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
My pleasure. This was fun.
Thank you for tuning in to the Canine Culture Podcast. Please make sure you subscribe to the Canine Culture Podcast on your favorite podcast platform, and make sure you're following us on social media. If you have any recommendations, any topics that you'd like to hear, if you know of any guests that would be good for the show, or if you yourself want to be a guest, please reach out to us. Send us an email at canineculturepodcast@gmail.com or send us a direct message on social media. Thank you for listening, and please share this with any of your dog-loving friends.